What's up, Gamecock fans? It's Elijah Campbell from 107.5 The Game here, fresh from Legacy Arena. And man, what a game it was between South Carolina and Maryland. A Gamecock victory. Let's adjust the microphone here, shall we? Let's do this all. How about that? There we go. Works better when you don't press the mute button. But South Carolina coming out with an impressive 71-67 victory over the Maryland Terrapins. And you might be like, Elijah, why is that impressive? They struggled for a lot of the game. Well, it's impressive because in March you survive and advance, and that's exactly what this team did this afternoon. And there's a lot of ways to go with it, but I'll go ahead and start with the main takeaway here. The main takeaway is that Mylasia Fulwiley took over this basketball game. The offense became stagnant. They needed Mylasia Fulwiley to be Superwoman. She was Superwoman. I mean, getting to the basket absolutely at will in this game. It was an impressive thing to see. And that's one thing about this offense that we've talked about a lot this year is that with all of these scoring options, with all of, what every coach in America would remind you, we're McDonald's All-Americans in high school. Sometimes it can be hard finding the scoring option when you just need a bucket and the offense becomes stagnant. Mylasia Fulwiley was that tonight. Just run down the stat line real quick for her. Led the team in scoring with 23 points, was able to also dish out 3 assists, had 3 turnovers, but she, for the most part, got to the rim whenever she wanted. And this is an offense that tonight was under 0.9 points per possession. It was not a great offensive afternoon for the Gamecocks by any stretch of the imagination. This wasn't exactly the sexiest game tape that you're going to be able to put out on offense and feel great about winning a national championship. But when things got tough, this team got tougher, and they were able to eke out a win, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, Sanaya Fagan, after the game, when we had media availability, was telling me about how even her specifically, like her offense is fueled through the defense, and it had to be that way tonight too. Maryland gave them everything. That's nothing that needs to be acknowledged. This Maryland Terrapin team who can score with the best of them. I mean, still technically under about 0.9 points per possession too, but was able to score enough in this game to really give South Carolina a lot of trouble. And defensively is really where they stepped up. If you'd have told me coming into this game that Maryland would hold South Carolina to under a point per possession, I would have a hard time believing you. If you told me that they would hold them under 1 point per possession to all the way down to 0.9, I still wouldn't believe you. And if you told me it was below 0.9, I would have had the hardest time believing you. But sure enough, that's what this Maryland defense did. Brenda Freese's team needs to be highly complimented based on how they game planned against South Carolina, because look, they took the Indiana blueprint. And I think what we saw Indiana do to South Carolina is what Duke's going to do on Sunday, because Duke was able to win an ugly basketball game today too. They beat North Carolina 47-38 in what was an absolute rock fight of a basketball game. But I think what we saw Maryland do today was exactly what Indiana did. And Brenda Freese, after the game at the post-game press conference, did say, we think we gave other teams a blueprint to beat this Gamecock team. And I can't 100% disagree. Maryland defensively collapsed the paint a lot. They made sure that anytime, Chloe or Sanaya or Joyce had the ball in the paint, that they were seeing multiple bodies at once and making them give it up, because the South Carolina offense, as we've seen a lot this season, operates so much from inside out in terms of getting their rhythm threes. Tahina Pow after the game said that one of her biggest issues with the offense today was that the shot selection wasn't great because they weren't getting rhythm jumpers. And this is a team that thrives on rhythm jumpers. And you saw, especially in that first half, a lot of the shots they took were contested, uncomfortable, because the passes weren't getting out there at the same kind of rate and spot they needed them to be, because Maryland, with their double teams, to their credit, really did fluster what South Carolina wants to do offensively. And Chloe Kitts told me after the game too that that's something they just have to do better as a unit of forwards. That they have to be able to get the ball out whenever the double comes. I remember one example during this game, during the third quarter, where Sanaya Fagan has the ball down low. She kind of gets a one-on-one and she's backing her defender down to pretty much play into that little one-handed right-hand hook shot that she shoots pretty well. But as she's getting ready to gather and go into that shot, Maryland sends a double from the baseline. And as soon as Sanaya turns around to gather into that shot, that help side defender that's coming over to double pokes the ball out. Maryland's got the ball going the other way. It's a turnover, and they forced a lot of them. I know specifically on the afternoon, Maryland forced 18 turnovers. When I say forced, South Carolina committed 18 turnovers. A lot of them were forced, and I would use the term forced to describe it just because of the aggressive double teams that South Carolina's forwards saw all game. And you saw Indiana do that too. There's a common denominator between the two struggles that South Carolina's had in the last two NCAA tournament games against Big Ten opponents, Indiana and Maryland. That common denominator are double teams in the post. And I talked with Joyce about that for a little bit after the game. And Joyce kind of mentioned like that's something she's going to have to get used to, that these double teams they're not just coming, and they're not just going to flood your face with hands whenever the ball's put on the floor. But this is something that like she's going to see the rest of her career, especially when any team that scouts them sees this and notices that they have a little bit of trouble kicking it back out whenever the ball's on the floor. Now, the one thing this team does really well is their post-to-post passing, which works really well in high-low actions. But when it comes to going inside out with your offense, sometimes that pass for the South Carolina forwards can be a little difficult, especially when double-teamed. And when the pass isn't on target and it's a little off and it doesn't allow the shooter like a Tessa Johnson, Tahina Pow, or even Bree Hall, if it doesn't allow them to catch the ball in rhythm, it's going to be a lower percentage shot. By the time the ball got there and they were able to necessarily go well for South Carolina, they missed shots. And that's one of the reasons why South Carolina can get baited into shooting days like they had today, where they were 4 of 15 from three. That wasn't an accident. I thought a lot of the shots were well contested, and even some of the open ones were just missed because you're just not in a consistent rhythm as a shooter throughout the entirety of the game. So if we're looking at things to kind of look at as issues potentially moving forward in the Elite Eight game on Sunday against Duke, I would look no further than the game plan that Indiana put out there against this Carolina team in the second round, and the game plan that Maryland put out there in the Sweet 16 today, where you are just going to sell out to not have one-on-ones down low, send as many double teams to the Carolina forwards as possible, and make them make the basketball play to kick out. I think Brenda Freeze is on to something when she says that is the best way to try to beat this team. And it's going to be a copycat. I guarantee you Duke does that. So when the game happens on Sunday, just watch for that. Watch how Duke defends the paint, because it's going to be very similar to what Maryland did today. Adam Ritter comments right now. He says, if we play like we did today against Duke, we won't win. I agree. And that's one of the reasons why, Adam, like today when I was on the early game with Bill Gunner, and he asked me, who would South Carolina rather see in the Elite Eight? I would say it's North Carolina, because North Carolina doesn't have the offensive spurtability that Duke has. And I hate using the word spurtability because I don't think it's really a word, but I'm going to just find my way around it and use it anyway, because it's the only way I can describe what Duke can do. And another thing is, too, it's not just that Duke kind of has a higher offensive ceiling than North Carolina, because Duke can make threes. Duke's one of those teams right now. They got a couple girls like Reagan Richardson. When she's on, she can be an absolute flamethrower. And we saw Reagan Richardson be a flamethrower against South Carolina when these two teams met last season at Cameron Indoor, and she hit a ton of threes and gave Duke an early lead. But then, of course, last year's South Carolina team did what last year's South Carolina team did, and that's overcome that deficit and end up winning by a lot of points. They did that a lot last year. But this year when the two teams met, South Carolina pulled away to a lead as big as 20 in that second half, and they cut it down to 8. And a lot of that was because of players like, Reagan Richardson, a lot of players, like Vanessa DeJesus, who came off the bench today in only 20 minutes and gave Duke 8 really big points, which really built their lead in the first half that they carried for the rest of the way against North Carolina. And what we saw, if we were going back into the time machine here to see, how they played when they first met, Chloe Kitts took over the game. That was the second, actually, because the Michigan game in the opener was closing time Chloe. Closing time Chloe showed up in that Duke game whenever the reserves were in, and Duke made that run, cut it to 8. Chloe came back in the game and made sure that door was slammed shut. Things are going to look a little different. Duke's going to defend South Carolina a lot differently on Sunday than they did when they first met at the beginning of the year. Now there's more of a blueprint on maybe how to slow down this South Carolina offense. And I think we're going to see every time Chloe Kitts touch the ball, she'll be aggressively double teamed. Every time Anaya Fagan has the ball down low and tries to get into her hook shot, she's going to see a double baseline, because that's usually one of the hardest doubles as a forward to see. Sometimes when that help comes from the nail or from the middle of the free throw line, or maybe that middle third of the floor, sometimes it's easy to see where your passing lane opens up. But what Maryland did today a couple times, bring that second defender from the baseline in kind of the Sanaya's blind spot. And that can be really tricky, right? That can be something that is really hard to be able to identify in real time and know where the opening is. Because when two's on the ball, that just means one player is going to be open. That's simple, right? And when that double comes from the baseline, sometimes, and it hits your blind spot, you don't know where that open player is because it's not as blatantly obvious. Which is why if I was if I were coaching a college basketball team or a basketball team of any kind, and I want to start aggressively double teaming maybe an opposing team's best forward, that would be a strategy I would employ. Would be sending a double from the baseline from the post player's lack of vision, right, and make them have to figure out where that help came from, and really test where, like, their knowledge of where everybody on the floor is going to be and create that open shot. So that's one thing that South Carolina, I think, really struggled with today. A couple of plays I asked about every player in that locker room what maybe some of those offensive issues were in that first half. Tina Pow said they just weren't getting rhythm looks, getting rhythm threes. Maddie McDaniel said it wasn't really anything that Maryland did specifically, but it was a couple of self-inflicted errors, which I would agree with. I would agree there was a fair share of self-inflicted errors in that game. I don't know if it's exactly the reason it was so close, because I think Maryland did do a really good job of kind of forcing Carolina's hand. And another thing too, I can't remember, I guess who it was off the top of my head. I've had a conversation today, but I had got one answer of the ball just stopped. It stuck. You get the ball movement needed to be able to create good looks for the guards. And with the starting lineup, that became a really big issue with the starting unit. The starting unit really struggled to score the ball. And the team as a whole, I mean, in the first half, you had 17 points in that first half. That first quarter and a half or so, and all 17 points were scored by Chloe Kitts or Mylasia Fulwiley. But what you saw Mylasia do, and part of her 23-point takeover, where she really did a lot of her magic late in the game, was that when she put her head down and got a full head of steam and got downhill, she was getting to the rack whenever she wanted to. And that was the big difference in this game. I tweeted earlier tonight from my account that Mylasia Fulwiley took over this game and wasn't going to allow South Carolina to lose, plain and simple. And I think that's the biggest thing you can chalk this game up to, was that Mylasia Fulwiley was on another level where she was just not going to allow her team to fall behind and take an L today and have their season end. She took over. And anytime she put the ball on the floor, she was getting to the basket. She was hitting floaters. She was drawing fouls. She was creating fast break opportunities. That's when Mylasia Fulwiley's at her best. And that is when you see her have the impact on these games that you do, is whenever she is relentlessly attacking the basket. Sanaa Fagan was telling me after the game too, when she starts picking up that momentum and picking up steam, they were constantly talking to her saying, no one can guard you, get to the rim. No one can guard you, get to the rim. And that's what my favorite thing about this team dynamic is that you have these older players who are willing to maybe give up their share of the offense whenever someone like Mylasia just getting to the basket and being effective by getting the basket. It's that constant saying, hey, no one can stop you. You get to the rim at will, and you're going to create offense for us. And they did a really good job of encouraging her, and you could tell by the free-flowing nature that Mylasia played with today that she knew she can get to the rim, and whenever she did, good things were going to happen. And they did. And so credit to South Carolina for being able to identify where your easy button is and to be able to just utilize it until you eventually create a lead. It looked bad in the third quarter. Maryland, to their credit, man, again, that is a tough bunch, especially on the offensive side of the ball, where if you had told me too that Maryland played this game as well as they did, that they would have gotten a 7-point lead in the third quarter without really dominating the offensive glass, I would have had a hard time believing that, because this team thrives. Maryland is an elite offensive rebounding team, but they do a great job of getting to the paint as well. They can dominate the paint point battle as well as anybody. And when I was talking to Bree Hall about her matchup with Cheyenne Sellers specifically, now Bree always gets the hardest and most difficult defensive assignment every game because she's the best on-ball defender. Quite frankly, she's one of the best on-ball defenders in the entire country. So when I was talking to Bree about this, asking maybe what is different with Cheyenne Sellers than maybe like a Madison Booker or an Anissa Mora or whoever it is that she's had to guard this year, she mentioned that Sellers was able to back her down a little bit, was able to maybe get into or get her back to the basket and move her closer to the rim. And I think that gave Bree some trouble today. Not a lot of players give Bree trouble. Very, very rarely do they. And Bree even won her fair share of battles in that matchup with Sellers today. I thought that was really the key one-on-one to watch for in terms of who is Bree going to draw on the defensive side of the ball. And when Tyler Head asked me today on the extra point with Jack Feltry about, who's the player that South Carolina really needs to stop, I thought that was going to have to be Cheyenne Sellers, because that's who I thought Bree Hall was going to be on. And I think you can tell. I think Dawn tells you without telling you who the most important player to stop is, depending on whoever Bree is guarding. And Bree was guarding a lot of Cheyenne Sellers. Now, Sellers was able to get 10 points and 7 rebounds, able to get 5 assists and help facilitate the offense a little bit, but did it very inefficiently on 3 of 11 shooting. And that's just what Bree does. No one is going to, you can score points on Bree Hall. You're not going to score them efficiently. I mean, and that was kind of like the whole battle with her and Madison Booker too, is that Madison Booker was going to get some points, but she was going to have to shoot 20 plus shots to do it. So holding Cheyenne Sellers 4 points underneath her game average this year, and doing so by making her take 11 shots and only hitting 3 of them, is vintage Bree Hall. It's vintage South Carolina defense. That's what they do, and that's why they're in the position they are. That's why they are the number 1 seed in this region. That's why they're the number 2 seed. That's why they were able to rack up like 16 quad 1 wins during the regular season. That's why they had the resume they do, because this is still ultimately a defense first team. And this is a team that defends better than anybody in the country, which is why it's so hard for me to pick against them in any matchup in the NCAA tournament, is because I firmly believe that this is such an elite defensive team that even on an offense's good day, they're not going to be able to manufacture offense easily. Today was one of those examples, right? Maryland's a great offensive team. And late in the game, in that second half, Maryland had some self-inflicted turnovers, but a lot of it was that they couldn't get comfortable against South Carolina's defense. So that's another large element to this game to really focus on. If you want an honest takeaway, it's that South Carolina's defense, they won this game on the back of their defense and Mylasia Fulwiley getting to the rim. That's really the 2 biggest things too. And Chloe had a really good game today as well in terms of making sure the offense didn't flounder early. I mentioned how much this starting unit has struggled to begin the game, but Chloe with 15 points and 11 rebounds was still the most effective starting scorer. And she was really the only scorer for the first several possessions of this basketball game. To give you maybe an idea too of how much the forwards for South Carolina struggled against double teams. I mean, as well as Chloe played in terms of getting to the basket and scoring and being efficient, she was 6 of 11, so over 50%. She turned the ball over 5 times. And I think a lot of that was just the amount of bodies thrown at her and the amount of hands she saw in passing lanes, and just that collapsing of a defense in the paint and selling out to protect the painted area. And Maryland tried to win that battle today because they've been sorry, I got distracted there. Maryland has won the paint battle with a lot of teams this year. And you could tell that was kind of their MO and what they wanted to do today. And the only way to do that against South Carolina is if you can keep them out, easier said. But Maryland was able to copy and paste that game plan from the second round and work pretty effectively. If you look point paint battle, it's tied. South Carolina normally dominates the point paint battle, whether it be on second chance or fast break opportunities. South Carolina normally wins those, and that is not a battle that they lose. And Maryland was able to keep that competitive. By keeping that competitive, they were able to keep themselves in this game. So that Brick's offense need to do to get better. And I'll end it like this, by circling around and saying that this team has to protect the ball better. I don't know if you survive a game against Duke that by turning the ball over 18 times. I don't know if that's a recipe to winning. If you shoot as poor as they did, 4-15 from three, you might not survive that either. Because when Duke's at their best, they are knocking down threes. And there's no guarantee that Duke shoots as poorly from three-point range as they did. They're 5 of 24 today. I don't think that's the norm for a Duke Blue Devil team. We could go back and look and just double check like what the percentages are for the season, just to kind of give you an idea as to how effectively this Duke Blue Devil team can shoot the ball. We saw it last year when they played at Cameron Indoor, where they were able to seemingly hit almost everything they threw up. And defensively, Duke is elite as it gets to. This is a top 5 defensive unit in college basketball as well. I think they're 4th. Yes, they are 4th in defensive efficiency, according to Bart Torvik. 31 on offense, but at the same time, this is a team that is a top 65 three-point shooting team. They make 34% of their threes. So when they get hot, they get really hot. And right now, this team is one of the best in college basketball since February 20th. So February 20th, they got beat by Louisville. It was their last loss of the year. Since then, they have beaten North Carolina. To end the regular season, they beat a Florida State team that can score a lot of points in bunches, and they beat them pretty easily. Then they got their revenge on Louisville by double figures. They beat a Notre Dame team that is a 2 seed in this tournament. And then they were able to beat NC State, a 2 seed in this tournament, in the championship of the ACC tournament by 14 points. They do it by smothering defense. And then they absolutely beat the brakes off of Lehigh, 86-25. They had a scare against Oregon, 59-53, and then they won the rock fight today against South Carolina. Right now, it looks like Bart Torvik may be giving them a 23% chance of winning this game. I think he's got projected 65-58 South Carolina win. I think that's kind of the type of game that we get, just because Kara Lawson's team is always so good defensively. She's a good defensive coach. She's gotten that from being in the Pat Summitt coaching tree. But what this team does really well is they're a top 20 team in turnover rate. They force turnovers on about 29% of their opponent's possessions. That's a lot. That is absolutely a lot. They're not really a force to be reckoned with inside. So they're probably better off by just shooting a ton of threes, even though they don't necessarily do that on a game-to-game basis. But what Duke does is they will make you really uncomfortable. And if you commit a lot of live ball turnovers, they're at least competent enough offensively to turn those into points. This is a much more well-balanced team than Maryland, solely because Maryland was elite offensively. And I mean, according to, if you just compare them to other teams in the Power 4 conferences, they are below average defensively. But the Duke matchup presents a bigger issue than North Carolina, just because there's that familiarity. The familiarity combined with now there's a little bit of a playbook on how to play you and defend you is going to give a coach like Kara Lawson, who's a great defensive mind, an avenue to slow you down. And if you're not on your P's and Q's, they'll turn you over. They'll turn you over a lot. And we've seen the games that South Carolina has lost this year, maybe have had some issues taking care of the basketball. So if you don't take care of the basketball against this Duke team, you can possibly turn the ball over 20 times. That's not out of the realm of possibility here. So you just got to be able to knock down shots. Part of knocking down shots is catching the ball in rhythm. So when Duke does bring those double teams, you have to be prepared to kick the ball out. Don't know what the officiating crew is going to be like on Sunday, but what I can tell you is that this officiating crew, if it's the same as today, you've got to be extra careful, because today was probably one of the pickiest called basketball games I've ever seen. I'm not really one who enjoys analyzing officiating, because I do believe that's just a part of the game. I don't believe that wins teams games or loses them games, but it does change how you have to play. And I think South Carolina had a little bit of a harder time adjusting to that today, even though that was a very hard game to adjust to. You at least have a sample size. So that's the same crew that's coming in here on Sunday and officiating that game. I still think South Carolina wins. I think they beat Duke by about 7 points. I think it's going to be a real nip and tuck game, kind of like what we saw today. I think we might get a slight repeat. I think they might win by a little more because I think some of the things that they have are correctable. I think this team is very self-aware and cognizant over what these issues are, just based on the conversations I've had with them. It's just now I'm going to pick South Carolina. So that's why I'm leaning South Carolina in the game on Sunday in the Elite Eight. I think Don Staley and company punch yet another ticket to the Final Four once we get done with everything here at Legacy Arena. So exciting game. Don't have the time just yet, but final score today, South Carolina 71, Maryland 67. Thank you for listening in to my breakdown. We'll be tweeting all throughout the 1075 the game account from player availability tomorrow and press conferences, as well as keeping you updated for the score during the game on Sunday in the Elite Eight. And then, of course, I'll have a video breakdown once that game is over to either eulogize the season that was or react to the South Carolina Gamecock team making another run to the Final Four, this time in beautiful Tampa Bay, Florida. I'm Elijah Campbell. Thank you for listening. And of course, thank you to my sponsors who allowed me to be here and be able to provide you this coverage, starting with Lexington Discount Homes, Atkins Law Firm, Hilton Garden Inn, and of course, my friends over at Columbia Craft and Peak Drift. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you can catch this. If you didn't catch it live today, you can catch it tomorrow. And I'll continue talking ball with you guys and see if the Gamecocks can do it again, make another run to a Final Four. Until then, we'll see you.